Like many of you, I have taken to walking my neighborhood once on my own, first thing in the morning, and again later for a family walk after dinner. If you can do this practice, which for me has become sometimes exercise, other times adventure exploring, and often a walking meditation, I recommend it for mindfulness, for mental stability, and for body and earth awareness. It was Tuesday of this week when the words appeared on the sidewalk. Some of you who live in my neighborhood, Annie, Natalie, some of you may know what I'm talking about. Written with pastel chalks in a child's hand, the messages, as though sent from a bottle for lonely shipwrecked islanders. They wrapped around the entire block, and they began just as encouragement for runners and joggers. You can do this. Never give up, one wrote. Just keep going, in pink and blue. I didn't pay them much mind at first. I thought they were merely a cute window observation of the many joggers who run our sidewalks each day. But then, as I continued walking, the messages, well, they kind of fell apart. The scribe, whoever it was, just began to write words, a word, every few yards or so. Words like us. And then a few steps later, family. Eventually, I came to the word love. And then I kept walking until together appeared. I slowed down my walk. I spoke each word out loud like a mantra. Then came another word, inspiring. A few steps later, another one, friendship. And suddenly they became watchwords for my week, holding me together each morning, binding me to all my neighbors. Then, continuing the walk, came the word beauty, followed a few steps later by life. And then, each morning on my solo walk, I found myself searching for the words, delighting when I found them. I was on a treasure hunt now. They echoed in my heart throughout each day. I would remember that pastel child's scrawl, life. They were a message from someone who's filled with hope and encouragement and ideas, and they had something they wanted to say to me. Little old me. The days passed, and the words became scuffed, and the rain clouds threatened, and so I resolved to write those words down here in a sermon for you. As we learn to use Zoom, Google Hangouts, we learn to use group chats and all the new ways to communicate, we must keep the old ways too. Graffiti chalk on the sidewalk, postcards, phone calls, messages in a bottle, other messages between us, but also beyond us. We are not the first people to live through a pandemic. Our ancestors, be they spiritual or actual, well, they have a message for us too. They have a light that is extraordinary if we will watch for it. This week, I decided to revisit David Francis's excellent 2012 documentary film, How to Survive a Plague. The film begins in 1986. Francis documents the earliest work of the AIDS Coalition to unleash power, also known as ACT UP. These were New York City-based AIDS activists who organized successfully to improve treatment, and by force of will, anger, and strategy, their work forced enormous federal institutions such as the FDA, the NIH, and the DHHS to address their institutionalized homophobic bias that had so far resulted in stagnation and indifference that led to so many deaths. ACT UP's activism moved the needle forward, and as a result of their efforts, these behemoth government agencies moved AIDS research and medical options to a higher priority and an urgency of release. The relentless energy of the ACT UP activists included such actions as a massive protest resulting in hundreds of arrests at New York City's City Hall. They staged a massive kiss-in at St. Vincent's Hospital to protest the gay discrimination people were encountering there. They traveled to Rockville, Maryland to stage massive protests in front of the FDA. They rode a big gay bus to Bethesda, Maryland to attend meetings at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. You see, ACT UP had created a special task force, the Medications and Research Task Force. People who read, not scientists, but just regular folks reading medical journals, became updated on all of the newest international science in new AIDS medications, setting up an underground dispensary for all the newest drugs that could only be purchased outside of the United States but could offer healing to people who were sick with AIDS in those early days. Most famously, they protested a special Catholic Mass at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City where the mayor, Ed Koch, worshiped. In the middle of Mass, they protested the cardinal as he preached and led the prayer, the cardinal whose abstinence-only messages were killing young people everywhere. ACT UP met every Monday evening in a church basement, and at each meeting, they would read the names of people who they knew who needed legal assistance, who required medical assistance. Through their activism, through their strategizing, they cared for each other. They united in anger to fight for the services they needed, facing a government that wasn't willing to fight for them. Their lives were at stake, and the lives of people they loved. And they united in glorious, beautiful rage. Do you know why I do not despair in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic? Because there was one person who went down to that church basement, who sat with those activists, who faced their anger, who listened, and who accounted for his department's failure of leadership. That person, back in 1987, who sat in that basement, that person is the current director of infectious diseases at the National Institutes of Health, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is basically the lead scientist and the adult in charge of this crisis today. He was there in that church basement, and so he brings his memory of those activists' passionate fight for their own lives into this current moment. It has been over 30 years since ACT UP began their Silence Equals Death campaign. And all of those bold activists, artists, lawyers, scientists, mothers, and doctors, they are speaking to us now in 2020 as we figure out how to survive another plague. We must unite in all the ways that we can, and it won't be in church basements this time. But we will be connected. We will shine our lights for one another, and it will be across the miles, across phone lines, across the web. We will unite in anger and in despair. in fear and in joy, in anxiety and in hope, in laughter and in playfulness, we will unite. Even if you are a small forest surviving off of moon alone, your light is extraordinary. In those moments when you can find it and light the way, your extraordinary light will be enough. It will be enough for you and for someone else. No matter how dark the night becomes, someone has left a message for you across the ages, a roadmap for how we will survive and thrive. Whatever name you give to the source of your faith, I'd like to offer you another: your relationships. Now is the time to live in service to your relationships, to love, to all that binds you to one another, so you may light the way for each other. This is how we will survive a plague. My friend, Reverend Micah Busey, a gay Christian minister in New York City, he wrote a poem this week, and I would like to read his words in closing. It's called A Prayer of Gratitude for Those Who Have Known a Plague Too Well. He writes, "Ever since the day I embraced my gay self, I have been prepared to die of a plague. The little boy whose mother first responded to my coming out with a loud, 'Be careful,' then realized she should follow up with a hushed, 'I love you.' Ever since the day I was embraced by my community, I have heard stories unspool, watching sobbing flow, felt sadness and fury gurgle beneath even our brightest spurts of joy. I have memories that are not my own running through my blood. I have memories that are not my own running through my blood. I have history I cannot understand, giving rhythm to my every breath. I have anger against government inaction that still surprises me with its vitriolic strength. And I have something else, thanks to my four queers. I have hand-me-down knowledge that is threadbare, but covered in glitter. And I, knowing the continuing violence of religion against my scarred and sassy people, I have a different kind of faith, a faith that is not the opposite of fear. My elders took fear and faith and mixed them into a movement. My elders acted up so that I might not die in dread, but live in love. My elders taught me that adjustments in physical distancing need not be the end of communal connection. That we can be safer without spreading illusions that we were ever really safe. That the balance between be safe and I love you is essential to survival. That rage can be righteous when connected to a collective roar. And now I take this legacy and hold it in my beating heart, since I can barely hold anything in my cracked, scrubbed, raw hands, fearful of a plague, but buoyed by the work of those who knew one too well. Those whose voices and bodies blazed the trail that we must now all travel together. Because we should always have memories that are not our own coursing through our blood. We should always have history we cannot understand invading our every breath. Smallpox massacring native peoples. Influenza ravaging 1918, 1919, 1920. AIDS, stealing lovers, friends, progress, and time. We should always have names and lives and deaths echoing in each elbow bump. Larry Kramer, Cliff Morrison, Barbara Vick. We should always rage against our government when it deflects, delays, and downright lies. When it demonizes entire populations and calls reality a hoax. And while we remember and breathe and bump and rage, may we offer thanks to the fighters. Because gratitude feels so much more fierce than grumpiness. Because action feels so much more generous than stagnation. And because hopeful vision, dolled up in some appropriately doomsday drag, is the least we can offer those awesomely ornery saints who keep giving us all the tools to fight and fight fabulously. Amen. May it be so. Oh yeah.